Okay, welcome everybody to Action and Potential in Outreach, Education, and Research. This is our second free global webinar devoted to interdisciplinary arts-integrated outreach efforts around the world. Our first webinar, Reconnecting Our Brains One Cell at a Time, is available for viewing on the BrainFacts.org website and also on nwnoggin.org. My name is Bill Greiser, and I teach neuroscience at Portland State University. And along with my artist colleague, Jeff Leake, co-founded an entirely volunteer outreach nonprofit known as Northwest Noggin. We go places and we bring our diverse, informed, and enthusiastic graduates and undergraduates who are excited by their research and their study of brains and behavior into our own community, to K-12 schools, to youth correctional facilities, to houseless youth centers, to listen and to hear what people already know and what they'd like to know, and to see where our stories and discoveries from labs and classrooms actually intersect. To see faces light up while a grad student describes their work on sleep or anxiety or depression or adolescent brain development, a grad student who often looks like them, is inspiring. We also make things like, pipe cleaner neurons and, pipe cleaner cone photoreceptors, and examine real human, and animal brains, actually, to motivate and spark, compelling conversations with people in our community. Since 2012, we've met and connected, synaptically, I have another one here, with almost 50,000 people, again, entirely as volunteers, and we absolutely, absolutely love this. Our community, like all communities, is rich in talent and potential, and it is an absolute joy to be there and to get challenged, to learn, to not be the expert, to explore, to discover, to be inspired, and also to help inspire in turn. Our students, it's a testament, I think, to this approach that our students just keep returning again and again and again. And science, of course, like many disciplines, suffers from a failure to welcome multiple perspectives, and this can undermine innovation and discovery. We certainly worked at institutions that considered outreach as part of their marketing plan, right? Only visiting, privileged private schools or charging tuition and admission, that really excludes a lot of people, relying on in-reach, right? Where busloads of kids are brought into fancy, unfamiliar spaces where the scientists are feeling comfortable. And reading off sort of memorized elevator pitches, and other pre-approved scripts, and not actually seeing other people, listening to them, challenging our existing biases, expanding opportunity, and ultimately learning anything new. So today we're going to talk to you about the power of going places where you are not the only expert, for interdisciplinary outreach designed to engage, to invite, and to value the perspective and contributions of others. So I'd like to introduce my colleague, Jeff Leake.
All right, so I'm Jeff Leake. As Bill mentioned, I'm an artist, but I'm also the co-founder of Northwest Noggin. As an artist, I like to make things. I think it's an essential way for us to learn about our world. And in fact, in our first webinar, one of the things that we did in response to the pandemic was to have people create found object neurons out of the things around them that held some meaning to them. In that spirit, one of the things that you'll see today is that outreach can actually be very creative. It has a potential to inspire curiosity and inquiry, and to motivate people to engage with science in a way that's personally relevant to them.
Thank you, Jeff. And we are extremely honored today to welcome Richard Wingate, the head of anatomy at King's College London and the editor-in-chief of BrainFacts.org, and Lee Wilson, who's the public engagement manager at the MRC Center for Neurodevelopmental Disorders at King's, and also an avid outreach practitioner herself, as they explore this question: what does outreach mean to you? Ultimately, outreach is different things to different people. So we asked outreach practitioners, collaborators, teachers, some of our volunteers, what is their own definition of outreach? Then we asked Richard and Lee to talk about their responses to these clips. So take it away and enjoy.
Outreach is time-consuming and involves putting ourselves out there in front of an audience that is not our usual one. It always means being outside our comfort zone, being it with school children, asking the most naive but most difficult question, or in a pub or bar, on a stage like a stand-up comedian with a mic, without our PowerPoint slides and probably not enough jokes. Or on an interview, on a live, radio, afraid to stumble off words like now, or saying the wrong thing. But at the end, it is all worth it, and we should take the time, make the effort, train people to communicate and engage with the public, because this is the only way non-scientists will hear the story directly from us and will hear the research directly from us.
Hi, my name is Kelly Rimal, and I'm a trained scientist who jumped from the lab bench to doing outreach programs full-time. For me, doing science outreach means bringing my whole self to the role. I don't worry about what a scientist is supposed to look like or how a scientist is supposed to act. Instead, I try to express the me that loves asking questions and learning new things. That means I also don't have to worry about knowing all the answers. When someone asks me something I don't know, it's an opportunity for them and for me to get at that knowledge and to propose an experiment to learn new things or to figure out where to look something up. By bringing my whole self to communicate science, I hope to model that anyone can bring their whole selves to science, because science is a space for everyone.
Outreach is talking to people about science in words that anyone can understand. It's not patronizing and it's not dumbing down. Outreach is much more than just telling people about your research. It's listening to them and to their expectations and their concerns. By doing so, you build up trust and confidence in each other. An eminent British scientist once said, "There's nothing more profound than the naive question." A simple why or how question can force you to think about your research in a completely new way. And don't forget, communication or outreach between academics of different disciplines is just as important. A geologist and a cardiologist may be equal as peers, but the language of their fields of expertise is completely different. Outreach can be done in many different ways: talks, the media, social media, video and podcasts, a chat in the pub, photography and graphics. Sharing your knowledge with others is both important and enjoyable.
Hi, my name is Brandon McLean. I'm a middle school teacher in Portland, Oregon. Outreach to me is one of the most exciting things when a great outreach organization comes into my classroom. It's one of the most exciting things that I can sort of bring to students. I'm an expert in teaching kids. I'm not an expert in the various subject matter that I teach. I know a lot about it, but having people who actually work in their field come in and present to students the things that they know and the things that they understand gives kids this authentic real-world connection between the things that we're studying and the things that are happening in the world. The best outreach that comes from great organizations like Northwest Noggin comes into the classroom without a presumption of what it is that students should know or want to know, and rather comes in with lots of information, lots of activities, lots of things, and asks students what they want to know. And then they follow the questions that students ask, and they take those, they respond, and they take the conversation wherever it goes, following the lead of students.
To answer the question on what outreach is, we must consider the context to which it is applied. In a general definition, outreach entails providing knowledge and services on a topic of interest to a targeted audience or community who might not otherwise have access to these services or knowledge. However, in the context of neuroscience research, outreach represents an often underserved area of science communication. Every human being has a brain, which plays a role in every aspect of our lives, and community members want to know more. However, there are significant inequities in our society around the dispersion of this knowledge. Therefore, it is fundamentally important that we seek to address these inequities through ethical science communication practices. That is where neuroscience outreach comes in. Through neuroscience outreach, we can seek to provide knowledge and services around relevant aspects of brain functioning to community members who don't have access to such knowledge or services but would benefit from them, facilitating an informed, knowledgeable, and conscious community.
Hi. My name is Angela Hendricks with Northwest Noggin, answering the question, what is outreach? Well, outreach is not just popping into a school to do some extra teaching. It's an opportunity to reach out to people of all different backgrounds in all different kinds of spaces. Outreach is an opportunity to meet people where they're at and bring something to them that they might not otherwise have exposure to. It's a chance to learn and listen and to meet new people. Doing outreach is a chance to empower others to ask questions, to consider new ideas, and ultimately to connect with community. You get to see firsthand those that you've inspired, inspiring other people, and the community connection just grows and grows. We know that inspiring the next generation of thinkers is important, and we know that connection with community helps humans thrive. And most importantly, being involved in outreach is just an awful lot of fun.
My name is Danny Gray, and I'm an undergraduate student at Portland State University. I have been volunteering for outreach events for almost a year now because I believe that everyone should be able to know at least a little bit about how their brain works. And outreach gives the opportunity to present this knowledge in engaging, artistic, life-changing ways to people who may not ever get the exposure otherwise. So not only do I learn from my co-volunteers and my professors when I go volunteer with these events, but I also learn from the kids that we volunteer with because these kids come from all different groups and they have so much insight, and I'm always thrilled to be able to hear about new phenomena that I may not even already be aware of from people who are younger than me. And their excitement really is contagious during these events, and they always lift my mood just by reminding me how lucky I am to have access to this knowledge and these experiences. I've met so many insightful and inspiring people through these events, and I love being able to connect with these youth and hopefully encourage them to get involved with these experiences no matter what their background is, similarly to how they've encouraged me to keep at it.
At Northwest Noggin, we bring neuroscience and art to K-12 classrooms and to communities both rural and urban with people of all ages. We meet people where they are at, and we hope to inspire them with teaching and mentorship that they may have never gotten if it weren't for community outreach. Outreach for me is going to places we are needed whenever we are needed. Outreach brings us all together.
Outreach for me is about bringing something to community that may otherwise not be able to experience it. It allows me to share my passion for the field and showcase that anyone can be a scientist. During one of my outreach trips, I met a young man that was telling me about how he grew up around violence and poverty and how that led him to end up at a correctional facility. During his stay at the facility, he enrolled in a nursing program, and he expressed how being able to participate in the outreach program really excited him for his future in healthcare. To me, that was a very special moment because it validated that the work I was doing was making a positive impact. In the end, for me, outreach is about inspiring others to do amazing things.
Hi, my name is Richard Wingate, and I am editor-in-chief of BrainFacts.org. And I'm here today with neuroscientist Dr. Lee Wilson, who's also the public engagement coordinator of the Centre for Developmental Neurobiology at King's College London. And we've been watching those clips, and what we were going to do is have a conversation about some of the themes that have been raised by our contributors and explore some of them in a little bit more detail. So welcome, Lee.
Hi, Rich. Thanks for having me. So, Rich, it's always interesting when we discuss things around outreach, but I know that you've been involved in several projects throughout the years of outreach and public engagement. So I think what I want to ask you is, what do you feel the benefits have been to you as a researcher and your research?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think it's something that one of the contributors just now, Elaine Snell, pointed out, and I wholeheartedly agree that it's sometimes the questions that you get asked. So you could be talking to the general public, talking to a scientist from a different field, and the questions that they come up with are different from the kinds of questions that you have when you talk inside your own bubble of close colleagues. And I can't remember a time when I haven't been asked a good question at an outreach event, and also a time when I haven't actually come up with a new connection, built a network, sometimes even come up with a new research collaboration in the most unlikely of environments. And so from the scientist's point of view, I think there is a really important value to doing outreach. What we sometimes find difficult to understand is maybe we know we should do it. We know that outreach is valuable, but exactly what the impact is on a community and the people we're talking to. And I guess you've had a lot of experience. How do you see that impact on the communities that we talk to in outreach?
Yeah, well, I think it's a vital question that you have to ask when you embark on any sort of public engagement or outreach. But I think there's always that feeling that people really love to access the knowledge and the research and the questions that you are investigating in your research. And that quite often inspires, their interest, the community groups or your audience, and stimulates ideas and creates conversations. Do you think we have to be there? I mean, outreach is different from publishing something or appearing. There's something about
television
having the kind of a face-to-face interaction or meeting a researcher personally and them talking to you about their work. And also, it's really important that interaction, that close interaction, really helps to develop the trust that the general public have in the research that's going on and in the researchers, and also allows that kind of sense of accountability that what is public money being spent on in research. It gives a chance to have an interaction about that. And I think quite often having that knowledge for people empowers them to and gives them a real world connection with the research that's going on. And also that works both ways, so that researchers get back into the real world, out of their bubble, and into talking to people about what they want to know and what they are interested in, and just having no presumptions about what people are interested in or where the conversations could go is also quite useful.
Yeah, I think that's quite an interesting point about not having presumptions and not maybe being pushed a little bit out of your comfort zone as a scientist. Presenting your ideas is not to presume that the audience will necessarily have that same experience or expectation. What they're going to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, lots of the testimonials as well talked about having listening and interacting, but I know that two-way conversation, I mean, is obviously very, very important and of mutual benefit. There has to be a mutuality to your public engagement. But in your previous work, Rich, what have you found that and how has it worked, that engagement between parties, if you like?
That's an interesting question, because I started off actually doing a lot of work with artists, and certainly in those early outreach efforts, a lot of the engagement was between me and an artist collaborator. The output of what we did would be an artwork. Sometimes it was something that was in a gallery. Sometimes it was there was a theatre piece which I sort of contributed or advised on. So there was always a public output, but the collaboration was much more between the partners involved, and that's where a lot of the ideas came from. And then afterwards, we spoke about it and published about, wrote something about it, wrote a gallery piece to go in a catalogue. It was, I think the two-way interaction element is certainly the most valuable part of what we're doing. I can hear that helicopter in the background.
Yeah.
That's the helicopter from the local hospital shooting off, I'm afraid, just shows the times we live in. But so just back to your question about engagement, I think it talks a bit about the questions you get from people who are outside your sphere. I think a longer term engagement, something where you really work together, is incredibly interesting, valuable for a scientist, and it really changes your perspective on yourself. And I think that's something that you can keep track of. I guess one thing that we don't really know is what constitutes success in an outreach effort. You know, so we have these conversations, we do good work, we really enjoy it, but how do we know that what we're doing is making a difference? You were talking about communities. You know, what can we do to actually assess how effective it is and what our impact is? And impact is an important word these days.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's, you know, what makes for effective or successful kind of public engagement is, a big question. Some things are easier to assess than other things. So I think it's always really useful to think about when you've delivered a project or an event, a public engagement interaction, you know, how you can make it better and how you can make that project the best that it can be. But before you can do that, you need to kind of work out what worked, what didn't work, whether there were, what the outcomes were of your project and what you wanted them to be in the first place. So that kind of sense of evaluation, and that word really scares some people, but it shouldn't really, because it's, if you just think of it as a way to make sure, you know, that what you set out to do, you manage to do, and where you can make it better for next time.
So who would you talk to? Do you talk to your audience? Do you talk to each other? Where do you get this information from? I think having conversations with everybody that's involved is always a really useful thing. And, you know, that's kind of capturing the perspectives of the participants, but also and seeing the effect that it's had and whether or not you know, you've achieved what you set out to achieve, but also the things that you didn't set out to achieve. You know, they can quite often be unexpected outcomes from interactions that are really important, that you think, oh, I must remember to do that next time, or that worked really well. So what do you do? Do you record it? Do you photograph it? Do you...
Yeah, you can. Well, I guess all of the above, really. So different ways of capturing information. You know, you have surveys, which are very one end of the spectrum and can be quite quantitative, but then you also have very qualitative approaches. So, for example, Noggin are really great at capturing their public engagement on social media and using photography and disseminating, you know, their interactions and how successful they've been, really successful. So there's all sorts of ways of doing it, but I think also touching base with your team that you've been involved with developing the project is also really important.
So do you always have that plan in your head when you start out, or does it, I mean, that makes it sound sort of
preempted,
quite difficult in a way. And I guess if someone's starting out, you know, if I'm sitting there and thinking, I really enjoyed hearing what people were saying, I want to get involved, you know, how would they actually do that? And, you know, do they have to have all these plans in their head before they start, or is it much more, I mean, what would you say when people come to you and ask you?
Yeah, I think it's quite often people do have a plan in their head, but it's just a matter of kind of formulating it. So I think it's always really useful to think about what the purpose is of what you're doing, and that does help down the line in trying to sort of assess whether or not you've achieved your objectives. But also think about who it is you want to reach out to. The general public is a very big place, and there are many different communities and sections of society. So to narrow down who you're trying to reach can sometimes help you kind of consider what the interests of the project and how the project will be developed, and how that will come about. But also, you may find that how you deliver your public engagement, so the platform that you choose may be, you know, really specific to who you're trying to reach, and also considering what is comfortable for you, because not everyone is comfortable standing up in front of a class of, I don't know, a school of children, or you might find that other methods of delivery is better for you. So nowadays we're really lucky, obviously. We have many virtual ways of engaging with the public. So, you know, you might...
Yeah, more so than ever, really.
Yeah, more so than ever. And
yes.
People are open and people have access to it in the main. Although it's really important to remember not everybody has access to internet in the ways that you may think. So, you know, but there's all sorts of different ways of engaging, and workshops, performance, writing, arranging events, doing workshops, setting up a YouTube channel or developing a podcast or a blog. So it's not, doesn't always have to be face-to-face. And I think that's always worth remembering, because it doesn't always appeal to everyone. Not everyone is comfortable.
Sure.
But I guess those are challenges that, or questions really, that you have to think about when you're thinking about doing public outreach. But I don't know when you've done your stuff, Rich, how have the challenges, have you come across these challenges, or what do you feel like the challenges are to what?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, they've changed over the years. And I think when I was starting out, public engagement and outreach used to be called public understanding of science. And it was it's evolved over the last 10 years, become much bigger, much better, much more part of a scientist's life, or the expectations for what a scientist should do. I guess you have to watch out it doesn't become a pressure, and it still remains as a kind of joyful thing. But you touched on something important about the money, a lot of us are paid from publicly funded bodies, and our accountability is sometimes a bit obscured by the fact we're sitting in universities and so or research centres. And so being there and talking about what we do is a form of accountability. So I think, the culture's changed, and it's a lot easier now. I still think there are a lot of, if there are any barriers, it's still probably, maybe it's a hangover from previous eras where it was seen as a distraction. And hopefully now, and what we've been saying in this conversation would make someone hopefully feel more convinced that it's not a distraction, there's positive benefits. And you've talked about the conversation and engagement, and you've made me think, yes, there are lots of things that I've gained from it. I think most people who've been engaged in outreach would say there's a gain, and it's somehow getting that message across. I think also there's, I think Sandrine Thuret touched on the idea of training, and you touched on the idea of supporting scientists or people involved in research in doing things. How is the best way to do that, do you think? Yeah.
Where does that support come from? And that's encouragement.
Again, it's an organizational support and organizational encouragement, but it doesn't necessarily, the organization where you work can be a barrier to inclusion and outreach, or it can be facilitative, facilitate it. And I think or it can encourage it. What you don't want, when you want to feed back to your research institute or university, is that this is a valuable exercise. And I think maybe sometimes that value, the message that it's valuable, has to come from us as scientists. Can't really expect the organization to suddenly have a change in direction that says we must encourage this. There are all sorts of levers that can be used, but it comes from us as well. I think sometimes a barrier is also the idea that, well, I'm a scientist, I can't take my lab with me to the general public. And that's why I asked you, when we were talking about this webinar before, we talked about ways in which we could do simple exercises that showed how the brain works, which didn't involve any equipment. And before we sat down to have this conversation, we shared some ideas, and I asked you to film your kids trying them out over their summer vacation. And I did a bit of filming of my kids as well, having a go. I think we'll go over to those clips now and then have a discussion about the whole webinar afterwards. But just to explain the kind of things that we did, what I wanted to do was show that there are simple illusions that you can do, optical illusions or illusions, visuomotor illusions that you can do, which illustrate how the body works and how your brain works. This is one of them. If you put your hands straight up and then flip them over so your hands are down and cross them over, and then bring it back and round towards you so your hands come up. And if you now look very intently at one of those fingers, focus on it, probably one of the middle fingers, really, really focus with all your visual attention, and then try and move it. You probably moved the wrong finger. I don't know if that worked for me. And I've been doing this a long time. And what that shows is that there's a competition between your visual system and something called your proprioceptive system, the system that tells you where your body is. And your visual system can override that, that sense of where your body is, because when you look at your hands in that configuration, your left and right hands are reversed. And that visual system confuses your brain. So we tried that with the children, and we tried some other ideas as well. And we're going to switch to some clips of those now.
Okay, guys, hold your hands out straight. Swap them over. Turn them round and clasp your hands. Pull them through. Okay, now Mummy is going to point to the finger that I want you to move, okay? Please, can you move, Florence? This one. Teddy, please, can you move this one? Oh, you can't do it.
Wait,
yay, that's done. And can you move Barnaby? This one. Yeah, you did it. Okay, brilliant. Right, now guys, keep your hands as they are. Now I'm going to ask you to do it again. Florence, instead of pointing, I'm going to touch your finger. Can you move this one? Oh, you did it first time. Teddy, please, can you move this one? Oh, you did it first time. Barnaby, please, can you move this one? This one. Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Well done, guys.
As you get closer, you close your left eye. You've got to stare at the green spot, though. You've got to stare at the green stone. Has it disappeared for you? Keep staring at the green stone and move your head up and down, and at one point it will disappear. Move it closer, slowly, slowly, slowly. Your head closer to the piece of paper.
Yeah. It goes.
The illusion with the two stones is probably the best understood of all of the illusions because it's rooted in the anatomy of the eye. The reason why one of the stones disappears as you move your face closer to the paper is because there is a blind spot in the back of the retina, and that's the point at which the connections from the retina leave the eye and travel to the brain. So the retina is full of photosensitive cells, and where there's a gap, they can't see anything.
Okay, Barnaby, I'm going to get you to do this optical illusion, which is looking at the dot and telling me when the cross is going to disappear. Please, could you cover that eye with that hand and don't look at it. Focus on the dot. Are you ready? 3, 2, 1.
Disappeared.
Is it definitely not there?
Cross, yeah.
The cross has disappeared?
Yep.
But you know it's there?
Yep.
I'm going to move it back.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. That's awesome.
Is that cool?
Yeah.
Thumbs up? Thank you for doing that experiment with me.
So what it illustrates is that the visual system is really, really good at fixing holes in the visual field. So the blind spot's actually quite large, but we never notice it because our cortex, the part of the brain that processes visual information, fills in the gaps. And what this also means is that if you ever have damage to your retina, this is something called a scotoma, sometimes it's very difficult for you to realize that you've actually got damage to your retina, particularly if it's not in the part of the retina, the fovea, which actually looks at the really high resolution parts of the visual world. So that's where your vision is concentrated. Damage there you'd notice, but in the periphery, out at the edges, it's possible that you can have damage and not even realize that it's taken place because of the visual system's ability to patch up holes and make the whole visual world seem complete.
Now tickle yourself.
Can't tickle yourself.
Tickle yourself.
If you tickle yourself because you know it's...
All right, now Chloe, you ready?
What? Yes.
Tickle
Tickle her. Tickle her. Great.
Hi guys. Don't look scared. Okay, first of all, I want you to tickle yourselves, please. Really try and tickle yourself to make yourself laugh. Underneath your arms. You don't look like you're tickling yourself. How easy is it to tickle yourself?
Not very easy. Not very easy.
Not very easy. Okay. Now, Florence, please can you tickle Barnaby? Come on, Floss, really tickle him.
No. Stop.
Okay, Barnaby, please can you tickle Florence? Okay, right, thank you. You can sit up, Florence. What was the most ticklish? Doing it to yourself or someone else doing it to you?
Someone else.
Right, thank you. Thumbs up. Yay!
So why can't we tickle ourselves? Well, the reason for this is believed to be because we have a part of our brain called the cerebellum, which has a model of all the intended movements that we're going to make. So it knows what we're going to do in advance of doing it, and so you can't surprise the brain with any of the movements that you make. So when we try to tickle ourselves, the cerebellum already knows exactly what our hands are going to do, and it's not a surprise. It can't be ticklish. On the other hand, when someone else tickles you, even though we know we're going to be tickled, the precise movement of their fingers is not known and can cause the tickle reaction.
Hi, Flossie.
Hello.
Okay, you ready to do an optical illusion?
Yeah.
Okay, if you look at the screen, there are two wheels and a dot in the middle. Can you move your head towards the screen and back and tell me what happens to the two wheels?
They move.
Did they move? But you know it's a still picture.
No, when you move back and forward, it moves.
That's right. That's an optical illusion. Thumbs up. Thank you for helping me do my experiment.
One of these sticks is bigger than the other. Which one is it? You just place them in different orders. Let me see. They're both the same size. No, this one. It's this one. No, they're the same size. Yeah, same size.
So the illusion with the twigs is called the Müller-Lyer illusion, and it works because those smaller twigs at the end of each of the larger twigs are pointed in different directions. And that gives the impression that one of the twigs is longer than the other. The precise reason, or the precise way in which this works isn't known. What's interesting about it as something to try for yourselves is that you can play around with those twigs. You can change the shape of the arrows. You can change how parallel those longer twigs are and how far apart they are and see at what point the illusion disappears. One of the interesting things which we showed is that although our visual system sees the twigs as different lengths, when our hands reach out to measure those twigs, they don't make any mistakes. So our visual motor control, that's the movement of our hands towards the twigs, is not fooled.
So I loved that. So, Lee, I love that. And Richard, both, I could tell that those are your children.
How could you tell?
It was very inspiring. I also loved, Richard, the way you say fovea. We say fovea typically in our classes, but we're learning. It's so inspiring. And actually, I have a lot of ideas and reactions, particularly highlighting aspects of inequity, actually, in access to public research and education about the brain, which has so much relevance for all of us. But let's start in terms of the future of outreach. Lee, given the fact that we're here with a pandemic, what is the future of outreach? How is it going to change, if it changes?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to say is, if you're thinking about outreach and public engagement, is don't panic about it, because although it's a really, really, different landscape to how I guess what we've all been used to, but there's so many online platforms, as we heard throughout the previous half an hour, but that are perfectly kind of poised for engaging and reaching perhaps even larger audiences than what we might have been able to do before. So that that potentially can let you have more of a reach than face-to-face would have done. So I think the pandemic has encouraged us all to sort of realign everything in how we do things. But I think key for kind of outreach is for researchers and students and educators to be supported really through training and through institutional support, really. And for outreach to still be an emphasis in what people are doing. So I think as researchers and public engagement people who want to do public engagement and outreach, then it's a really good chance for us to get creative about how we do things and think about things in a slightly different way. And I think that creativity is something that is really important, and creative approaches, and I guess Jeff, creative approaches to outreach. Would you say that it brings out the creativity in science as well when we're looking at that?
Yeah, I think one of the things for me when there's a kind of concept that art doesn't really have structure and science doesn't really have creativity, and the two don't really meet. And really for me, a lot of times, I want to sort of introduce science as a creative endeavor in the first place, because I think, that's often sort of missing from people's conception of what happens in science. I think for us, a lot of times we'll bring sort of open-ended kinds of projects and activities, and we're really trying to allow people to explore and discuss, and also really critically, I think, sort of share these really kind of diverse responses to things. So, if you have something that doesn't require a single answer, but people can approach it in ways that kind of make sense to them, what you'll see is a lot of different responses. And like what you were saying too, it's those sort of unexpected responses that kind of, it really kind of creates a kind of new perspective for all of us. So you will see things never thought we would get out of this, sort of simple assignment or project or whatever we're working on, and then everybody else gets a chance to kind of see, a different way to look at the whole sort of enterprise. So I think, that's a really kind of critical thing for me is to just, be open when you go out. So.
Yeah, sure.
So I actually had a question for Bill about inclusivity and diversity. So I know it's a big part of what we do, but how do we stay mindful of this?
Well, I mean, it's probably lost on nobody that there's 4 white people sitting up here talking about, outreach and inclusion and things like that. And, part of it is the idea that, the people we meet in schools and shelters and pubs and coffee shops and correctional facilities are decidedly not naive. There were some comments in some of those, recorded interviews about outreach. The people that we're meeting have extensive areas of expertise that we are often entirely ignorant about and that we can learn from as well if we listen. And I think it helps tremendously to bring along, to be educators. I never quite understand when you have like an outreach coordinator who doesn't also to some extent teach, who actually isn't, involved with the next generation of learners and students, actually, because there's, tremendous diversity in a public institution like Portland State, for example. And there's a tremendous interest in getting out into the community and actually representing, like being there and being seen. And so going places where you're not considered the expert and listening and constantly challenging, our own biases and preconceptions by sort of seeing other people and having dialogue, and going places where traditional programs, again, that are often, in some cases, some of them are really interested more in marketing and, making money and things like that, but where they don't go. Because there's tremendous value in, sort of expanding who does science, who is involved in science, whose perceptions and kinds of experiences and contributions matter. Sarah's experience, Sarah Moreno was one of our volunteers who spoke at the McLaren Youth Correctional Facility, really reflected that sort of genuine experiential knowledge. There's so many people that can benefit basically from, the research that scientists do on the brain, right? So, okay. So, Richard, you run or supervise or have some sort of control over a website, BrainFacts.org. How can you ensure that you build diversity and inclusion, into the neuroscience that you represent at BrainFacts.org?
Sure, and of course that is a central question at the moment across science globally as well. Representation of diversity. When someone looks at the website, we don't want them to see the picture you've got in front of you, which is for white. I'm going to say middle-aged. I'm going to apologise now to Lee. But science is a diverse enterprise, and it's important as a website that we reflect that diversity, and also the international diversity of different voices, and so diversity in gender, in age, in race. It's really vital. We have features on the website, even though it's called Brain Facts, that reflect the stories of neuroscience. I think that storytelling aspect is really important to convey what's going on in the lab. We have an in the lab section. We've got neuroscience in society. We also report the social issues roundtable events, which take place every year at our large neuroscience convention, where we look at the issues around neuroscience. And neuroscience is increasingly part of everyone's life. So it's a mission, it's a journey, Bill. It's a journey to try and introduce that reflect society, but also reflect the broader diversity of scientists who are there.
I want to say really briefly that I appreciate the efforts of, like, for example, SFN. When we've gone to the conferences in the past, they've helped put us in touch with, public schools and, community, groups that we can actually take, many of the grad students and undergrads that we're bringing to these conferences, and actually go to the community. Because, before the pandemic, we had 30,000 neuroscientists in a community, for 4 or 5 days. And, instead of sitting on a panel and talking about outreach inside a convention hall, it was terrific to go to San Diego Public Schools or, Chicago Public Schools or, Turner Elementary and Anacostia in DC. So that's another way to sort of, make the research reach the community. Mm-hmm.
I think just before we go to some questions, because I know that you've got some questions coming in, I just wanted to say that it's really important that we also show your work. And I think 20,000 of those 30,000 neuroscientists saw you with your pipe cleaner neurons cruising the convention, but also on the website that we show the good, the fantastic work that you do and provide the resources that can help educators and outreach outreach amateurs, anyone who wants to do outreach, have the materials and tools to hand. So over to you, and maybe some questions as well.
Yeah, so I understand there are some questions, and let me check. I've got to check Q&A here. Let's see. Okay, we got a bunch here. So from Bailey Sarka, she asks, I love that community outreach inspires and excites, but how do we engage the community in a productive way? Unfortunately, we have seen a lot of science-excited people that take to conspiracy theory explanations. My question is, how do we navigate nurturing curiosity while also making sure it doesn't head down a negative track? So you guys start with that question.
Wow.
Wow, that's really good. I mean, I think
it's a good
question.
Yeah, it's a great question.
I'm trying to work out, so I'm looking back on my experience as well and trying to work out whether I've ever had a negative line of discussion that's something that's ended up going down a sort of rabbit hole of negativity. On the whole, the enthusiasm that we bring with us and listening, as you've said in your at the beginning, listening to questions is more important than perhaps engaging in a kind of null-sum arguments that can lead you into a negative spiral. Never had that experience. I'm going to just say that now. So I feel that's actually a really good question. Lee, I don't know if you ever had that experience.
I'm thinking about that, and I think even by kind of going and engaging in conversations, I think kind of the sort of rigor that comes alongside science research, reflects in the engagement that you do. So what I guess you hope is that in some way that leads down a route that kind of helps prevent a kind of negative or helps the audience make their own balanced view of and opinions on things that are maybe based in the science and not kind of conspiracy slants on things and so on. Do you know what I mean? So the sort of attitude that we all approach scientific research with, that gets kind of that comes across.
That's really good.
I guess
that's a really good point. The open curiosity that we approach science with should translate into the way that we do outreach as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you want to add to that at all, or?
Well, I think, I think one of the things for us, and I don't know that we've ever really had anything that negative, like but that, yeah. I mean, a lot of times, we want to encourage sort of that kind of open discussion, and sometimes that can be quite speculative, but also there's a really good opportunity there for us to sort of discuss and address misconceptions, and so I think for us, it's really more of we see that as more of an opportunity, so it's not just dismissing people's thoughts or ideas, but it's actually saying, like, we have a chance to address this, to talk about it, and so I guess I think that for me, that just is more of an opportunity rather than anything that I really worry about. And I think that's probably maybe why we haven't had negative experiences like that. So
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think being sort of genuine and asking for people's experiences and questions and ideas. Right. Actually, oftentimes those perspectives, they may not be stated in the way that, a scientist would talk about a particular topic, but they are actually quite accurate, in terms of somebody's experience. And you can have a very productive dialogue, linking what you know about the brain, or you've learned about the brain, or you've studied about the brain, to what they're expressing in that moment. I'm actually thinking it was interesting because when we were at the McLaren Youth Correctional Facility, there was we had a really powerful interaction with a young guy who had suffered with he would hit his head against the wall when he got challenged by the guards. Like the guards would come up and start yelling at him, things like that. And we were explaining about how you could be overwhelming, deliberative networks in the brain that would let somebody actually process it. He was having severe anxiety and stress. So the best approach was to step back and not come running in and raise that emotional temperature. And he came over later and he was just saying, I really appreciate that, because he says there's always an impression or a sense that we're here, that we're terrible, we're not helpful here, but I want to be helpful. I just don't know how. And so he said that was really useful information. So we have another question here. How can we organize our outreach programs in developing countries, where people are, have fewer resources and fewer opportunities?
So I have a first go at that and just say that I've seen some fantastic outreach efforts in India, where there are far fewer resources, and hopefully we showed today that you can get a lot done without taking the lab. A couple of twigs and the sort of guideline of the Müller-Lyer Illusion is enough, actually, not only to demonstrate something about how the visual system works, but also to do an experiment as well. And I tried to get that across in the clip, that you can play around with those simple bits of equipment, whatever you find around you, and with a little basic knowledge, you can give the tools of experimentation to anybody. It doesn't have to be, there doesn't have to be a barrier, a technical barrier, or even a very great knowledge barrier. So I think that's actually something that I'd like to see maybe us develop on the website is some simpler tools that could be universally applied to countries where there really isn't much resource for neuroscience. But I'll stop there. Anyone else would like to say? I think Belle and Jeff, you've got huge experience. Lee, you've got experience as well in India.
Yeah, just what you were saying there about India, Rich, it's the, organising your outreach programs in developing countries. I think, it's really important to partner with the communities that you're going to be working with and to devise your programs together, because, it's really important to do that, so that, because they kind of know what's going to work and what's available and how things can also be enduring as well, so that you don't just go in and do your workshops, but that whatever you leave behind is enduring and meaningful and has impact beyond when you're there. So that is really important for, for developing countries as well. So that, I think
that's key. The conversation is key. That's really important.
Yeah. So,
Jeff, did you want to explain the found object neurons that were on the screen? When they were.
Sure. I think briefly. I think we're wrapping up here. So I will just one of the things we had done, and actually this kind of leads into what Richard and Lee were just talking about. We had really kind of thought about, like, what do you do when you can't get materials to people, when you don't, so we were really trying to think about a way to get people to sort of engage with that, topic like what is a neuron? What is your brain actually made of? By making these models of neurons just by using things that were kind of around them in their own environment, and oftentimes things that had some personal kind of relevance that could actually say something about who they were, but also gave them a kind of idea of what the structure was, and really, you could really think about like, what is the function of this thing, and do I have objects that actually, could represent, some of the like the function of your dendrites or an axon, and so there you could really. It was a way to kind of, with very simply, without any specific materials, you can actually go fairly deep into kind of learning about what that thing does. And also, you just end up with things that you just don't expect. So you see a lot of creativity in that people will come up with some wild ideas. So.
Well, thank you, everybody. I'm so sorry we're out of time because we have more questions. So we're going to talk with our hosts at SFN to see about, if we have an opportunity to answer those, writing down some answers or something, or having a dialogue. We really appreciate the questions, and thank you to everybody. Thanks to Richard and Lee and to Jeff and to SFN and to all of you watching. We really appreciate it. Thank you, and do outreach. Go places.
Yay!
Thank you.
Wear a mask. Cheers.